Hello, all. This is Dr. Dave Maslach talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3. And in this particular video, I want to talk about whether doing a doctorate degree is actually higher than a master's degree, and particularly within business administration. So if you don't know me, I'm a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There were so many people that helped me out during my graduate school that I wanted to give back and help out other people and just kind of, just put it out there and see what happens. Okay, so is a doctorate degree higher than a master's degree? And so what I'm going to compare against is probably a master's of business administration, so an MBA, right? So it just makes my life easier because that's the kind of area that I know. So I'm a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, right? So I know this kind of area. I have a background in engineering. I did my undergrad in chemical engineering, and I kind of know a little bit of this kind of stuff. So I can generalize to this. So is a doctorate actually higher in terms of a master's degree? And it's a little bit more trickier than you think it is. So just sort of pay attention, right? So this is a really, really tricky question in a lot of different ways because it depends on the criteria that you are assessing whether a doctorate degree is actually higher than a MBA. So in terms of as salary, you know what? To be honest, an MBA or a master's degree, particularly, it's got to be a master's degree that's in somewhat of a demand, right? So you can't compare apples to oranges. If you're talking about doing a PhD in basket weaving and then you're comparing it with a MBA or an MBA, or if you're comparing about doing a PhD in business administration or a PhD in finance, for example, and you compare it to a master's in basket weaving, you're probably not going to have apples and oranges. So it has to be something that's very similar. So I'm comparing within my field a PhD or DBA, doctorate of business administration, or a PhD in business administration to a master's in business administration. So just to make sure that you have it sort of controlled and everybody understands what's going on, right? So in terms of salary in general, probably an MBA, you're going to make more money at the end of the day. So, and the reason is not because that you don't make more money, like total amount every single year, as a PhD in business administration if you get a job in a business school, but it discounts there is a tremendous amount of selection effect that happens, and as well as the opportunity cost. So what do I mean by that? The selection effect is a lot of people can't complete a PhD. So if you're thinking an MBA or a master's degree is really difficult to complete, that's only 1 or 2 years, depending on what school you go to. Well, PhD is going to be 4, 5, 6, 7 years to complete. And you're living off of the same sort of salary. And that's after you did an MBA or something like that, right? So it's just way harder to complete. And not a lot of people, much less people complete a PhD. And I'm just being open and honest with that. It's just a lot less people complete a PhD or DBA going forward. I know a lot of people, and I bumped into a lot of people that have completed the coursework with a PhD or a DBA, and then they just kind of fizzle out, right? And then they just never complete anything. Particularly if you do things like online programs or where there's less support and all that kind of stuff, it's harder to do. So really think about that, right? So, and if you have that selection effect, it means that there's just, a certain population that's just not making nearly as much money with their PhD or trying to get their PhD. And then the second thing is there's opportunity cost, right? So it takes a long time to get your PhD. And if you account for that and all the lost wages that you have and you compound that over years and years and years, that's a lot of money that you're passing out. Particularly if you already have an MBA, right? So you have to make that up somehow, and it just takes a long time. I did my own financial calculation. I think I've told you this before. If you've watched this, I think it was about 55 years old, that if I just would have stayed with I had a master's of applied science in management science and with the engineering degree, if I would have just stayed with that and just kind of did normal career trajectory over time, then I would have made more money. And the break-even point would have been when I was about 55 of doing my own PhD in business administration. Now, I did a really fairly lucrative one. I took strategy or strategic management, so it's okay in terms of the amount of money that you make at the end of it, but you have to sort of account for the opportunity cost. And now some business schools will account for that opportunity cost, and they'll point out this. with an MBA, but they don't typically do it with a PhD, right? So you have to look into that and just make that decision. Is it all just about money for you? For me, yeah, financial considerations was really important, but at the same time, there's other things, right? So there's all these implicit rewards that you get, right? So doing things that you like to do and doing kind of interesting and curious things. That was really rewarding for me. And obviously everybody wants to make more money, but at the same time, that's just kind of common sense, right? But at the same time, the financial rewards or non-financial rewards are really quite nice, and they can't be downplayed, right? So lots of people sort of make that trade-off. The other thing, and so doing a master's is probably higher. I would consider in terms of salary in general, but it's probably going to be higher. And this was told to me when I started, and I was investigating this stuff in the engineering field as well, right? So doing a PhD in engineering, some of my faculty told me you're not going to make nearly as much getting a PhD in engineering compared to just getting your master's in engineering, if that's what you're concerned about. And it's true. And I know a lot of fields that are basically like that. There's lots of different reasons for it. You can watch some of the older videos where I talk about that kind of stuff. So the second thing is status. Clearly, a PhD is going to have higher status than an MBA in general. And it's just because it's a terminal degree. And that's the sort of thing I want to point out. Is it's a terminal degree, so it's the last thing that you could do in a university system in terms of educational requirements. And that also means that you probably have a lot more knowledge than you do with an MBA, right? So with a master's degree or an MBA degree, then you accumulate all this knowledge, and then you go with a PhD, you actually investigate the stuff and you actually really learn a lot more than you'd ever consider that you would learn in an MBA or a master's program, like a lot more. There's so much more to know. And it can continue to grow, right? I'm continuing to learn every single day. And so what I thought, I was like, oh, I know a lot. Like last year, I know a lot more this year. Some of that stuff I forgot, but, and then you do learn all that kind of stuff. And then the last thing in terms of, so PhD, I would sort of rate it higher in terms of a master's degree, in terms of the terminal education, whether it's a terminal degree and how much knowledge you actually accumulate, probably it's quite a bit higher. And then lastly, in terms of the general population, this is really kind of tricky because so sometimes a PhD is highly valued in terms of the general population. And, some people are really just kind of disinterested in it in terms of what it actually means and going forward and what you've actually done. So and the reason is people don't understand what happens and what you do with a PhD. So the people that kind of understand, have an idea what a PhD is, I think that there's a lot more kind of respect for it. But the people that sort of are really just, and, I came from I had no idea what a PhD was for years. I didn't even know anybody that had a PhD until I went to university. I was like clearly nobody. And so I had no idea what it all meant and what it all entailed. So in general, that if you don't know what it is, then you're going to discount it a little bit more. And just because you just don't know what it is, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And then the last thing with that is that as of late, there tends to be, there's a downward trend in both of these kind of fields, and it's moving towards more practicality and focusing on practical degrees. I think in general there is. A lot of MBA programs around the world are having sort of trouble meeting the demands or that it's just harder to find people that are wanting to do an MBA. Now, the same with a PhD. It's a really unique, different kind of career choice. And in a lot of programs, while there's lots of people sort of submit applications and stuff like that, there's still it's really hard to find people that are good and that are sort of capable at that level, right? It's just really difficult. And I think there's a trend towards people going into more practical things, which is totally fine. And there's lots of value to be said about that because there's instant returns and things like that. But then, there's lots of value that you can have with doing a PhD as well. So in general population, I would say it's kind of mixed they're either one of them, depending on what you're looking at and who you're talking to. It's just mixed. I wouldn't sort of say one thing is higher than the other one, right, in terms of classifying those. So there you have it. That's my thoughts in terms of what sort of is a doctorate degree higher than a master's degree. And if you like this video, give me a thumbs up and do subscribe to the YouTube channel. All right, take care. Bye.